and welcome back to Morbidly Bewitched. Did you miss me? I've been gone for a little while, but I'm back. In my last video, I discussed cremations, and in this video, I'm going to talk about everything that you can do with cremated remains. So let's get started. So you just got Uncle Jimmy back from the crematorium. He's in a nice little neat container. But what do you do with those cremated remains? Your choices are vast, so much so that I'm going to do 2 videos on this topic. In this video, I'm going to discuss burial, scattering, burial and scattering at sea, and keeping them. Burials. If you want to have a recap, take a look at the very first video I launched regarding full burials of human remains. The rules and regulations are technically still the same, just on a smaller scale. You can still buy a grave for the sole purpose of burying cremated remains only. Difference is, the grave that they open for that's so much smaller, it's not going to cost you just as much money, and depending on the council that you're talking about, you can get anything from 5 to 7 sets of cremated remains in a purpose-bought grave. If that grave also contains full human remains, then they limit the amount of cremated remains you can put in on top of that, usually to about 3. Burial at home. This is an option, but there's a few things you're going to want to take into consideration. Are you the homeowner? If you're in rented accommodation, you wouldn't be allowed to just go ahead and bury Uncle Jimmy's cremated remains in the backyard. La, 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 la. Because technically it's not yours. But if you're in your own home, then paying your own mortgage, or you have your house paid outright, then this is an option for you. But again, there is a few things you're going to want to think about. Are you staying in your house indefinitely? Or are you leaving your home to a family member? If not, and you plan years down the line to move house, and you've buried your cremated remains in the backyard, and you've some kind of memorial or plaque set up in remembrance, you're going to have to declare this at the time of the sale, which could affect the price. Or you may be required to actually uplift, exhume those cremated remains before you move. In a park or a national trust site is also possible, but you must get in touch with the organisation itself to see what their regulations are on the burial of cremated remains on site. It usually has to be in a very reclusive location, and they are extremely strict about any form of grave markers being left behind. Scattering cremated remains, probably the most popular choice. However, please bear in mind, if you watch my last video on cremation, there's quite a lot that you get back. Shocks some people, remember? About the same weight as a bag of sugar and roughly the same quantity. So when you go to scatter cremated remains, if you want to do this at a grave that you already own, the council or the owners will require that a grave still be opened, a small grave, as if you were going to inter the cremated remains. But instead of putting the box or the urn in, they actually scatter the cremated remains into the grave and then close it up. That's another reason why people don't just let you go into cemeteries and scatter cremated remains over great Uncle Jimmy's grave, because there's so much of them. They can't just have everybody going in and doing that, because cremated remains would quite literally be everywhere. Scattering in a national park or a local area that you like is allowed, but you still have to get permission from the organisation itself. Remember, they don't want everyone walking around sprinkling cremated remains all over the place. They're going to have an allocated spot specifically for that, and again, you're not going to be allowed any form of marker for that spot. One thing I would like to bring to everyone's attention when scattering cremated remains is something that can be quite upsetting and also quite amusing at the same time, is standing downwind of cremated remains. It wouldn't be the first time someone's went out to scatter Uncle Jimmy and the wind's been in the wrong direction. Oh, Uncle Jimmy. I always want it conveniently scattered in my backyard. Burial and scattering at sea or waterways. This is another option for you. First off, let's talk about harbours. Harbour is a nice popular choice for the scattering or burial of cremated remains, but you must get in touch with the harbour master to be allowed to do so, and then he or she will discuss with you what their protocols are. Your other option is actually at sea. If you get in touch with your local ferry, they'll be able to tell you what boat they send out and when for this particular task. Yes, it's actually done quite often, but they pick certain waterways, certain times of the day for this to be carried out. And usually there won't just be yourselves on that boat, there will be you and maybe a few other families doing the same thing. For all other forms of waterways, lakes and streams, environmental agencies require that you stick to some common sense rules and regulations. 1. Don't bury or scatter at a point of the river where the water becomes still or stagnant. 2. Don't bury or scatter the cremated remains in an area that's close to any kind of factories, buildings or personal homes. And 3. Don't try and bury or scatter close to an area where people bathe or swim. This brings us on to the last option of this video, which is keeping the cremated remains. Also a very nice option. To do so, you can either keep the remains and you can do so with burial or scattering in the container supplied by the crematorium itself, or you can buy an urn. Now your choices for urns are also massive. These can range anything from stone or terracotta urns that are safe to keep outside in the garden if the person, say, liked gardening, or nice ones that you can have in your home that can be metal, ceramic. The choice is endless. Wooden. There's eco urns now for people that like that. And again, just to touch on the topic of urns, for your burial at sea, you can get specifically designed urns for this that dissolve over time in the water, usually made from things like banana leaves or rice paper. If you do decide to keep the cremated remains at home, another thing you're going to have to consider is what happens to those remains when you die. Are you going to bequeath these to another family member? Thanks. This then also brings me on to the other option you have. You can keep cremated remains and give instructions to another family member that when you die, those cremated remains are then, say, mixed with your own and you can both be scattered together. Remember, there's going to be a lot of cremated remains there, but it's still a very morbidly romantic gesture. Don't forget as well, if you have a favourite furry friend that unfortunately has passed on and you got cremated, you can have their remains mixed in with your own and you can both be scattered together or buried together. So as you can see, there are many options for what to do with cremated remains. Join me in my next video when I'll be discussing glass, jewellery, diamonds, fireworks and launching into space. Please subscribe and I'll see you soon.